Hey guys, this is Colin Moshman for CardsChat.com, and we are continuing on with me and Katie's course, Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days. So the topic of day 9 is implied odds, as well as reverse implied odds, which was honestly slightly too long for the slide title. But we're going to talk about it some, and implied odds itself is one of these ideas that's really important if you're ever playing with deeper stacks, because it's going to answer questions like, am I correct to take a flop with this low pocket pair? Is this a good call I'm about to make with my gut shot straight draw at the flop? So we'll be building on this material a lot in the next section on draws, but for now, this will be how to calculate implied odds, why they're important, and let's begin with implied odds pre-flop. So we're going to define implied odds to be the ratio of how much you can win to the cost of calling. So you might ask, well, how much can I win? And that's just going to be the effective stack. So for example, let's say that we cover our opponent, the amount that we can win is his stack. So if he has a stack of 2,000 and it costs us 100 to call, then we're getting 20 to 1 implied odds because we can win 20 times our 100 chip investment in the form of his stack. So this is a really key concept that you generally want at least 20 to 1 implied odds to set mine with a low pocket pair. So in other words, to call with the primary purpose of hitting a set and otherwise leaving the pot. So we didn't talk about this in the book, but the 20 to 1 implied odds rule is actually a reasonable guideline with other speculative hands too, like suited Broadway hands, stronger suited connectors. With weaker speculative hands, you want to be a lot more careful. So if you're going to play a suited ace or a low suited connectors, you would want better than this. But there are going to be a lot of different times when implied odds are going to influence how much you can call with these speculative hands. And one thing that's really important is that this rule is not set in stone. So if you have more players in the pot, or more likely that you're going to stack a player who's a maniac, or if you have a higher pocket pair, like let's say pocket sevens, that has more chance of winning without hitting a set, these are all good reasons to call a bit more. And similarly, when the opposite hold, to have stricter criteria, like for example, that you think when you do connect, your opponent is not actually going to put many more chips in the pot. So again, a lot of examples of that coming up at the end of this PowerPoint, but let's not talk about implied odds post-flop. So a lot of people define post-flop and pre-flop implied odds to be the same, but we're going to look at them a little bit differently. So for post-flop, we're going to look at implied odds as the ratio of what you're likely to win when you do connect to the cost of calling. So keep in mind, implied odds are a framework we're going to use when we need to hit something. We're not going to talk about implied odds when we have top set or pocket queens or something like that. This is when you're considering making a call in a spot where you need to improve. So when do your implied odds get better? We just addressed this a little bit, but anytime the effective stack is deeper, that means you can win more money when you connect. Big win for implied odds. You want people that are more active players and also that are going to give you action. So the difference there, I guess the second and third point look pretty related. But let's say you have a tight player who raises some early position. He's more likely to give you action if you connect because he's on a very tight range. You might have a range of ace-king, ace-queen suited, high pocket pairs. And so when you do hit a set, he's going to pay you off a lot with his overpairs. Or similarly, we can have a player who's a maniac. He's in a very wide range, but he'll pay you off with anything. So people who will give you action are very useful for implied odds. Now the other concept that's important is reverse implied odds. And like we said, this is not going to be something that we quantify. We're not going to put a number on reverse implied odds. This is going to be a qualitative concept. Okay, so the idea is that when we're ahead, we're not going to win much more money. And when we're behind, then we can lose a lot more money if we do continue in the pot. So this is typically going to be times when it's a coordinated flop and we have some kind of one pair hand. So we don't really like our hand. We have bad reverse implied odds. So let's look at an example of that in the hand examples to come and move to those right now. So our first hand, we have pocket threes from the cutoff. Our opponent raises, so let's ask, what are our implied odds? So remember, we define implied odds pre-flop as the ratio of what you can win relative to the cost of calling. Now you might say, well, I could actually 5x my stack if I call here. I could do the set everybody else calls, but we're referring to our implied odds with respect to the initial raiser. So here the amount we can win is our stack, since he covers us. So we can win our 6,800 chips, and it costs 350 to call. So the way I would do this math in game is I would say, look, roughly speaking, my implied odds are 7,000 to 350. So just short of 20 to 1 implied odds. So this is pretty much just good enough. Calling here is good. And remember, this is not set in stone. So what that means is that if you start the handoff with 6,500 and you call, that's fine. If you start the handoff with 7,500 and you fold, that's fine. What you definitely do not want to do, let's say you start the handoff with 5,500 or 4,500, then it becomes really spewy to call here. If you only have, say, 12 to 1 implied odds, or if you have 30 to 1 implied odds, you start off with over 10,000, you fold, then it becomes quite a bit too tight. So we're just looking to get this approximately correct, rather than as a rule we can never deviate from. As usual, we're going to take a quick look at post-flop. When we get 3 opponents with a low pocket pair, we pretty much know we need to connect with our set to continue on. Against just this guy, maybe it's a dry flop, and we actually win at showdown. Maybe we call small bet the flop, and the rest of the way it gets checked down. But against 3 opponents, this is going to be a really easy hand to play. We've missed. Here it's a coordinated flop, and we're just going to give this up. Now we're going to look at another low pocket pair spot, but here there's going to be a bit of a wrinkle. This is from a 9-man sit and go, and this player limps. So what are our implied odds here? The way I would think about this in game, it's going to cost us 30 to call. We cover this player, so he has approximately 40 times that amount. Okay, so 30 times 40 is 1,200. He is a little bit less than 1,200, so we're getting a little bit worse than 40 to 1 implied odds. What that says is that we can definitely call here, and calling is certainly going to be a better play than folding. But this is one where we don't have to think about just in terms of implied odds, because there hasn't been a raise. So if everybody folded to us, we could raise this hand. And similarly, I would raise here. If he had put in a min raise, then calling would be the common play. But when he limps, I like just attacking that limp, as nobody has shown any strength yet in this hand. And also, 6s is not a totally bottom pocket pair. So we have better chance every time we increase our pocket pair by 1 rank, going from 3s to 4s or 6s to 7s. Our equity gets a little bit better each time, more chances to win when we don't hit our set. So I would like a raise slightly larger here, but 90 is fine. And we don't hit our set, so now we can go back to our training and assess if we want to c-bet in this hand. And for me, my answer would be usually yes. We do have some showdown value. It is reasonable to check back and just look to play a small pot here with the pocket 6s. But we only have 2 opponents. It's a fairly dry ace-high flop. So our default play of c-betting looks good to me here. That's exactly what hero does. We get called, and now we're going to check back and just look to show down our pocket 6s rather than bluff. And we actually win. So he's the one who should be bluffing with his busted straight draw, but we win with our unimproved pocket 6s. So a great outcome for hero there. We now have 6-5 suited in the hijack. And over limping, so over limping means limping behind when there's been a previous limper, is going to be your best option here with very deep stacks. But instead hero raises. I'm not a huge fan of this raise. To me, this is too light. And so I would rather limp behind with the deep stacks and our low suited connectors. And I would prefer folding compared to raising. But we're going to see what happens next. We face a re-raise. And here the correct play is going to be to fold. So it costs us 300 to call, and we cover our opponent. So we're getting implied odds of approximately 9 to 1. And that's not good enough for a pocket pair. That's definitely not good enough for low suited connectors. So this is another incorrect call. You might say, well, why are we looking at a hand where someone is playing totally wrong? And the reason for that is because we're still facing implied odds decisions. These are important implied odds decisions. And so we learn whether we see someone making them correctly or incorrectly. And we're going to get another one to check out at the flop. So here at the flop, we have a gut shot straight draw. And the question is, what are our implied odds? And now we're going to switch our definition to what we're likely to win from this player if we connect. And the answer to that is more than just this 440 bet. There's a good chance we're going to take the rest of his stack if we do connect. And on balance, we might win something like another 1,200 chips. So that means that if we play this hand over and over, those times we connect, that some of the time we win nothing more, a lot of the time we stack them, and on balance we win another 1,200 or so chips. So you might say our implied odds are this 1,300 out there plus another 1,200 chips, so approximately 2,500 chips. Costs us 440 to call. So we're getting implied odds of, roughly speaking, 6 to 1. We'll talk about how to use that information on the next section on playing draws. But very roughly speaking, you might say we're getting somewhere between 4 to 1 and 7 to 1 implied odds based on how often, how much on average we win from this player and we connect. So hero calls. This is another pretty optimistic call. And this time, though, this goes to show that the implied odds framework is the correct one when there's future betting, because no matter how much you say we're likely to win of this player's stack when we do connect, on average it will be something additional. And here we see that even though hero made some too loose calls, he is correct that when he hits his hand, he will get paid. All right, we now move on to King 7 offsuit. Early in an MTT SNG without an ante. We check. And here in this flop, betting out would be totally fine, but here he elects to check. So my question here is, how are we going to think about this spot? Is there any particular concept that should jump out at you? And the answer is yes. This is a classic reverse implied odds spot. So the problem here is that if we go ahead, let's say our plan is to call this player down. Well, when he has the best hand, we're almost drawing dead. It's very tough for us to improve to beat him when he has a straight, flush, two pair, some kind of, pair and draw combination. So we have very little equity against his range. We're often drawing dead. So that's a tremendous problem for us. Because on the flip side, when we do have the best hand, he's probably not just going to continue firing. We need a lot to go right to win this pot. We have to have the best hand right now, and he continues bluffing us, and we catch his bluff. So this is a hand that has massive reverse implied odds problems. You don't normally want to flop top pair and just check fold, but this kind of spot is the one to do it. And let's see what hero does. Hero does correctly fold. Now we have ace-10 suited under the gun. Hero raises. We get a call, and our opponent donk bets. So we're the ones who could continuation bet. He bets instead, so this is called a donk bet. Full pot. So question here is, what are our implied odds? And this looks pretty strong. Okay, this betting pattern of him calling pre-flop, and much more importantly, on a coordinated flop like this, now betting out full pot when we're the ones who have raised under the gun. This looks pretty strong. So most of the time, we're basically going to double up when we connect with our gut shot. So here you might say the current pot is 700, that we're going to win something close to the remaining 900 in our stack after matching his bet, and it costs us 350 to call. So we're getting very roughly implied odds of 1,600 to 350. So somewhere between 4 to 1 and 5 to 1 implied odds. Now, and hero is, by the way, correct to fold in this spot. So you don't need to feel totally comfortable calculating implied odds, right? They're a guess, they're an estimate mainly post-flop, to some extent pre-flop as well. The important thing is that you factor in future betting. And future betting with the draw is usually going to work for us. Future betting when we have some kind of marginal made hand is going to work against us. And so those are going to be some of the most important points in this section. Don't worry so much right now if you're not doing a great job quantifying this or don't know how to, come up with a great estimate of implied odds in a 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 5-to-1 type form. So we'll get there. And in the meanwhile, we now have today's big quiz question. So let's go there right now. And here we are early in an MTT. And we're going to have a two-part quiz question. So part one, as you guys can probably predict, what are our implied odds here? And part two, should we fold, call, or raise with their pocket sixes? So pause the video, think about that. And if you get it right, you are ready to move on to tomorrow. So let's go ahead and answer these questions. So our implied odds here are going to be the ratio of what we can win, which is his 5,000 stack as we cover him, divided by the cost to call, which is 140 chips. So right here, I'm just putting in my calculator sitting right by my desk, 5,000 divided by 140, and it says 35.71, etc. to 1. And so basically 35, 36 to 1. It doesn't matter. It's not like that's giving us a lot of information. Significantly better than 20 to 1. And therefore, we should call and take a flop. So again, key things that show that you got this quiz question correct are you know what to put in for implied odds, and also that you know that makes it significantly better than 20 to 1, and that we should call with the pocket sixes. So as usual, we'll continue on. Your hero calls this pretty dry flop, continues calling at the turn, and we now beat the board at the river. I will go ahead and value bet this because if our opponent has absolutely nothing, he can think he's going to chop with us because there's a full house on board. So I would have value bet the river here, but hero does make the correct decision pre-flop. All right, so that wraps up the hand examples, and that's going to end day 9 on implied odds. Tomorrow we move on to a very cool topic, day 10, and how to play draws. So thanks very much for watching. This has been Colin Moshman for the CardsChat.com course. Become a winning poker player in 30 days with me and Katie Dozier. See you next time.